Welcome to Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing. What if you could learn from experienced real estate investors, find out what got them to where they are now, get insight into their daily habits, and take these insights to inspire your own growth? Each week, Jonathan Green shares an in-depth look at the mindful approach to real estate investing. Jonathan is a lifelong real estate investor, advisor, and coach, as well as the founder and team leader of Streamlined Properties. Whether you're looking to start from scratch, get to the next level, or just for a straightforward and honest approach to real estate investing, Jonathan seeks to provide a free mentorship program you can take with you anywhere. Now, here's Jonathan.
If you find an investor who hasn't done some stuff wrong on their journey, please let me know. I actually wouldn't want to talk to them because that's not realistic. But today, we're going to go through the journey from mistakes all the way into a new part of real estate for Clint Harris. He started with a lot of traditional assets, eventually got into converting commercial real estate into self-storage at Nomad Capital. We're going to talk all about it. Let's get to it right now. This is episode 132 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Clint Harris. Clint has a long history in real estate, but he transitioned that into revitalizing commercial buildings into self-storage and his role in investor relations at Nomad Capital. We're going to talk about the things that he did wrong and the things that he did right. Clint, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. If we're going to talk about the things I did wrong, this might have to be a 3-part episode, so we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always helpful for people to be vulnerable about the mistakes they made because that's what can save listeners from making the same mistakes that we've made. And let's start there. If you could just pick out one, what was the one biggest mistake that you made just in overall real estate investing?
I think the biggest mistake I probably made, and I think I've probably made it twice throughout my investing career, was focusing so much on the investment strategy that I chose and the next project that I didn't focus on my ability to scale or specifically focus on the project after that. Like I spent so much, and you can run into obstacles in terms of the leverage you create for yourself through debt to income ratio or whatever it may be in terms of, or the cash on cash return or whatever it may take. You spend so much time focused on the next project because you're so excited about it that you don't really think about a clear vision of what your long-term goal is and walk backwards from there to understand what the scalability of your current strategy is. And if the next project that you're so excited about is going to help you or it's going to hurt you.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense, though, with current culture. There's so many objects out there that look good, so they can be attractive. So you really want that, but it doesn't fit really into the full plan. When was it that you figured out that you really needed these things to string together for it to make sense?
I think originally, the first time I recognized that was I built out a small portfolio of 9 single-family properties, most of those BRRRRs. And throughout that process, I sounded like every other new investor at the time. I was buying properties in 2010 to 2013. It was still the post-2008 crash. You could buy properties for dirt cheap. One of the mistakes I made was assuming that properties were always going to be that cheap to continue to buy single-family rentals, which is certainly not the case. And number 2 was like, okay, I'm going to buy a house for $35,000, $40,000. I'm going to make $6,000, $7,000 a year net off of it. After I've got 10 of them, I'm making $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And then I can buy 1.5 to 2 a year. I'm going to continue to scale. And like next thing you know, I'm making $100,000 a year and I'm done. I'm retired, which is, that's 23-year-old me, right? Talking about this.
Yeah.
So
that's a pretty common, though, theory because that's what a lot of people are trying to train out there. And I think they forget that the more units, the more problems. So more units, limited cash flow just means more management or management expenses.
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it, right? So if one of those properties, to get the metrics I needed, I was buying at the 2% rule, but the quality of tenant
which
that comes
does not exist anymore.
It does not exist. It's the 0.8% rule now.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
the quality of tenants you get there, I wasn't doing Section 8, but it wasn't much better. And so each property is 1 or 2 headaches a year at least, and then you multiply that by 9. If you start looking at the amount of time that it takes, and then every time somebody moves out, a door is kicked in or something is ruined where you have capital expenditures that almost immediately cannibalize half a year to a year of income.
Exactly.
Then you get to the point you're like, you know what? I was 9 in and I was like, this is not scalable. It doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, the natural progression from there is multifamily. For me, the vision went to small multifamily, and then it went to multifamily when I moved to Wilmington in 2017. I took a promotion selling pacemakers and defibrillators. I moved to the coast to take over a territory. That opened up an area that had tourism, right? So I could buy small multifamily. When I converted those to Airbnb properties, it would 3 to 4x the gross rental potential. So it was a huge jump forward. And to me, I thought that was, again, what I originally thought. I thought that was a destination for my investing career because I was able to replace my income as a fairly high earning medical sales rep that way. But again, I was chasing financial independence. And when I hit it, it came at the cost of time and location independence, right? And that's what everybody's chasing, especially as you start out, you're looking for cash flow, right? Well, I think what most people learn, especially with the ups and downs of the market that we've recently had, is that in the history of the world, appreciation has made more millionaires and billionaires than cash flow ever has or ever will, right? So you need the cash flow, but ultimately when that property really appreciates and you're still making the same amount of cash flow, you have to start thinking about your return on equity and how you can leverage that property and move on to the next thing. So I made the same mistake there. Like in terms of the scale and what I wanted for my life with single families, it wasn't going to get there. It got there in terms of finances with the multifamily properties, and those 14 Airbnb listings that we still own turned into partnering on a property management company that manages another 85. We built that company out just so I could try to hire myself out of having to manage my properties. So it looks passive, but it's really just residual because we front loaded 2 years of work to get that to where it is. When I realized I had accomplished a goal in terms of finances, but sacrificed in terms of time and location independence, I did something that I should have done earlier that I encourage everybody to do. I sat back and I said, okay, what do I want for myself? What do I want my life to look like in terms of financial, time, and location independence together, creating an independence of purpose, meaning I get to choose where I go, when I go there, what I want to do, and how I want to spend my life energy. So with what is that goal? And then what are the older, successful real estate investors out there doing that reflect what I want in my life? The older, successful guys that have time to go travel, spend time with their family, go fishing, whatever it may be, what are they doing? And so I interviewed 6 or 7 people that were 30 to 40 years farther along in their real estate investing journey than I was. And for me, I'm sure it's probably market dependent and it's going to change depending on who you talk to. For the guys that I talked to, it was 3 things. Number 1 was hard money lending and note lending. I didn't have the 7 figures it took to get started there in a meaningful way. The next was mobile home parks, and I was a little bit burned out from tenants because with Airbnbs, you have 8 to 10 tenants per month per listing.
Yeah.
And the third option was self-storage. So I started really digging in on self-storage and understanding that you're really just renting someone a box of air and they're paying you to put their stuff in there. And it's very like, it's got the value of multifamily in terms of one person. You know, when I had single family homes, one person can move out and really screws you for a couple months until you get the next person in there. So there's value with multifamily. But remember the lesson that I learned with my quadplexes and duplex, buying small multifamily properties that had bad long-term tenants in place. I was moving out month-to-month tenants that were chain smoking in the property. When I come in and I do a renovation and I convert it to a different asset class from bad long-term to a top-performing Airbnb property, it's 3 to 4x is the gross rental potential. And so when I ran into my partners, actually at a local real estate meetup here in Wilmington, what they were working on and the projects they had done in the past really jumped out at me because they were buying nasty old warehouses and big box retail buildings and converting it to storage. And anytime you say asset class conversion to anyone who's done it before, even on a tiny scale like I had, it jumps out at me. And also the ability to fast forward through a lot of the mistakes that I had made. Every time I had taken on a new strategy in the past, they had already done this. And it put me in a position where I could partner with them with capital. And we began the aggressive pursuit of passive strategies that have a conversion in place. And I went all in on self-storage in 2022.
Yeah. Just to hop back on a couple things, I think it's interesting that your scale in single family and your scale for when you turn to Airbnbs were ended up with the same function, like you said. I think everybody who's really chasing financial independence is definitely chasing time independence. They just don't know it, because what do you want the money for if you can't get the freedom? And that's the thing where when you get multiple, just like we said, sure, you can have 100 units. I don't know why so many people are obsessed with doors, because the more doors you have, the more problems you have. Just like you said, you could have 8 units if they're cash flowing $100 each, and then you have to fix one furnace. You're done for like 3 years for all properties, just because of one property. Or they're like, well, I love 4 families, but you have 4 furnaces. Like, I just think of furnaces because it costs a lot. And this is the thing that changes. And one thing about self-storage that I think is really interesting is because we call them tenants in self-storage, but they're not. I always like to think of it as, I'm just renting space to the stuff. They don't talk back. The stuff doesn't have a problem. Like if it's like a couple degrees too hot, they really don't care. They're just papers and motorcycles and whatever people want.
That's right. I think you hit on something there in that. If really quickly, what I see, so we host a local alternative investing mastermind, and my job is to network with investors of all ages and ranges all the time. What I see is that there's this linear progression that typically happens among investors, and it's the young people. A lot of times we live in an area where close by there's some military towns, and we get a lot of young military guys that come out and they have great character, great drive, and great hustle, and a little bit of money, but not enough to get started in a meaningful way. So what you see is a lot of people start out in their investing career as wholesalers. So they're wholesaling property because they're trading hustle for money, right? And the ones that are good at it start having a little bit of success. And then sometimes they realize they're selling properties to people that are flipping it. And they start flipping a few properties. And they get a few wrong, but then they get a few right. And they start hitting some good ones. And ultimately they realize, and sometimes that person becomes a realtor. Then they can sell their own flips and take the commission on it. Ultimately, the wholesaler, the flipper, and the real estate agent realize something. They're still trading time for money. And the day they stop working is the day they stop getting paid. So that person then moves on to start keeping some properties as single family rentals, right? So they build up a small portfolio of single family rentals. Then they learn the same thing that I did. It's really slow. It's really slow to scale, and it's not going to get you where you want to be. So then they get into small multifamily, very much like I did. Or they get into Airbnb because it juices the rents. Ultimately, they get to the point where, a bunch of small multifamily is more of a headache than one 40-unit building. But then a couple years after that, they realize if you go to 60 to 80 units, it's big enough that you can have an on-site manager and your life gets easier, and it's still just one roof. And at some point in there, this is like 20 years we're talking about right now. Yeah. And at some point, that person originally was looking at their return on investment and their cash on cash return, because that dictated how fast they could move on to the next property. But then as the properties start going up in value, they start looking at their return on equity. You're making $50,000 a year off a property and you bought it for $500, but now it's worth $1 million. So your return on equity just went down because the equity went up so high. So then they start liquidating and doing 1031 exchanges and moving that equity in. Eventually, if you do it long enough, just about without exception, I see people get to the point where they don't value on return on investment or cash on cash return or return on equity. They get to a point where they start valuing based upon return of time. And that's when a lot of times people start moving towards syndication offerings, because with a syndication, you have to have those 3 things to have success in any kind of real estate investing. It's time, experience, and money. But for people where your time becomes worth more than anything else, and without time, you can't get experience if you don't already have it, people can take their capital and the money that they have and put it to work with someone else that's using their time and experience. And I'm willing to accept a little bit less of a return than if I was actively working and flipping houses. But if I spend 1 to 2 hours every quarter when my quarterly distribution check and the report comes in, that's a really good return on time. And for all of us, I think as we get farther in our life and we have less of it, our time becomes worth more than anything else. And your return ultimately becomes based upon the amount of time that you have to spend to get it.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at that journey, I remember I used to, like, when I was younger, this will make sense in a second, but I would be driving and my dad would be in the car and I would try to like pass everyone, I would like go to the left and go to the right. He's like, just one time, just stay in the middle lane, let everyone pass you. When we get to the next toll booth, let's see if we're ahead. And every single time we were ahead of everyone else who was going around. So I was thinking when you were saying like how somebody over 20 years changed asset classes like 9 times, if they just kept those first few single family homes, they would have been worth like 5 or 6x what they would, churning income, huge appreciation. You could have taken HELOCs off the same property instead of trading doors after doors. And I think that investors forget, like, you actually have some free will or like favoritism. You can decide what you like, but they kind of trust everybody's doing single family. I'll do single family. I'll do a house hack. But why are people becoming landlords when they're terrible at it? We've all done it.
Yep.
Who likes being a landlord? It sucks. I mean, that's why property management exists, because none of us really want to be a landlord. It's aggravating and it's hard to match, what the tenants need all the time. But there it is. Every single day, you're going to meet investors at meetups who are like, oh, I can't wait to get a 4-family. And you're like, hi, your personality doesn't really seem like a landlord to me.
I'll sell you one. You want one?
Yeah,
I felt the same way a few years ago. You can buy one of mine.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that it's interesting to see that the journey doesn't have to be that same progression. You can go right to syndication, if you've built up the money to be vetted in that way, an accredited investor. And me, I'm 52 now, and I just invested in my first syndication early this year because just what you said, that is good time freedom to me. I'm trusting the operator to make the decisions, and I've reviewed what I needed to review. And that's just money put to good use, worth me not having to manage like a bunch of contractors and subs on my flips, which I haven't done in about a year now because it's annoying.
Sure. And you make a really good point there. And by the way, I co-host a podcast called the Truly Passive Income Podcast, and I'm looking forward to have you on as a guest speaker coming up soon. The reality is kind of the joke. There is no truly passive income because even in a syndication, and you just mentioned it, like you're putting your capital in and somebody else is doing the work and you're trusting that person. Your job is up front, right? You have to pick the operator, and it's kind of the difference in like if you're picking a deal versus vetting an operator, it's the difference in betting on a racehorse or betting on a jockey who's going to ride a bunch of different horses in a bunch of different races. Right. So you have to really make sure that you're, first of all, understand what their long-term goals are, what their strategy is, the business structure, and everything else. So you still have to do work. You just have to do it up front and then trust that person to do what they say they're going to do. But that's kind of the joke, right? Like there really is no truly passive income. On one level or another, you have to do the work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think syndications are close to the most passive just because as an LP, you're out of it. But like you said, you have to do the due diligence. You can't have if you have a great property and a bad operator, you're still going to lose your money.
Yep, absolutely.
It's a no-brainer. I've always thought that it's funny, though, that people are like, oh, I'm on the path to financial freedom and passive income, and I'm doing multifamily and I'm self-managing. I'm like, you can't even create something that's less passive than managing multifamilies or any renters on your own. It's literally a 24/7 job.
Yeah, I got bad news for you. Now you just have a job.
Yeah. Oh, and I was actually thinking, though, when you said that before, like the person who they are a wholesaler, then they become a flipper, then they get their realtor. They're like, oh, well, you traded in your 9 to 5, which was steady, and you had your weekends free and you were hanging out with your family. Now you have 3 jobs that all require the 40 hours. That's what they're trading into, and they don't understand. Wholesaling's impossible. I mean, it's a murky business.
That's why I think if you ask me about the lessons and the things that are most important to me, is that journey is a salmon swimming upstream, right? You're fighting your way up river, and you don't know what's coming up next around the next bend, but you're going to adjust and you're going to jump this waterfall or whatever. That's kind of what that is. You're fighting your way the whole way. I think that's the value of really spending some time with your spouse or life partner or whatever, and think about and visualize what you really want to accomplish with your life, what legacy you want to leave, the amount of time that you want to spend that potentially has the impact on your kids or grandkids that you may not even have or know or be thinking about yet. The amount of time that you get to spend with your kids is going to determine what kind of character they have and the interaction that they have with the rest of the world, and hopefully impact it all in a positive way. I think there's a lot of value. If you don't know what your goals are, I think that's the best place to start. And then find people that you think have gotten there or accomplished that in one way or another, and work backwards to determine what's next for you. Because it might be skipping single families or multifamilies and going straight to whatever it may be, or, maybe skipping property management. Your goal may be like, maybe the best thing is to keep the main thing, and don't get invested in real estate with your time and energy because you have a high ceiling with where you are. And it's better to keep the main thing and let your money go to work for you. Or if you have a pretty low ceiling with what you're currently doing, if you decide what your long-term goal is, maybe you can find a job in that industry that ultimately is going to give you a skill set to get there faster. And I think so many investors, like, life can be so reactive, especially when our job is to listen to the market. We want to hear what the market is giving us and adjust to storage or multifamily or flipping or wholesaling or whatever it may be. Like, it's easy to be really, really reactive. And, I think it's kind of the difference in if you're sailing across the ocean on a really long journey, if you're off by 1 or 2 degrees, you can miss it by 100 miles. But if you know exactly where you're going and you know what you're trying to accomplish, it helps you plot the course backwards. And sure, maybe you're still tacking and you're zigging and you're zagging and you're going back and forth. But if you know where the final destination is and where you want to land in terms of time, finances, and location independence that hopefully give you an independence of purpose, I think it helps you work backwards and draw a roadmap that can help you have a little bit of confidence with your decisions.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the market too. And one thing that I think is interesting, it's that there's people who are just looking at the national news and like, oh, the real estate market's terrible. And they don't know anything about their local market. I mean, like, real estate's so local. What's happening in Wilmington isn't happening where I am in Mendham, New Jersey. And people are just taking the headlines. Oh, it's not a good time to invest. It's like, but do you even know what's going on in your community, where the development's starting, where they might need self-storage? Because there's limited self-storage around here, which of course is an asset class, which we're going to talk more about, but I consider it recession-proof. It works in a recession and it works when everything's booming. Like, everybody needs it. That's why it's so popular. Other than that, there's no tenants and one toilet.
Yeah. Listen, absolutely. I think there's the real estate investing world as a whole and what's happening with the macro market, but there's also these tiny little bubbles. And usually in real estate, the riches are in the niches, right? If you're down in the ditches, like, that's the third round in a row. Sorry about that. But like, if you're in it, right, you know what's happening with the town council, you know about the development, there's always opportunity there.
Yeah, I feel like if somebody, as a brand new investor, they had some time, they didn't have money, and all they did was study their local market and make contacts in their local market, in their town, walk for dollars, look for houses that are dilapidated, not spend any money, door knock here and there, you'll end up with way more opportunities than somebody who's just focused on the national news and then saying, hey, somebody said it's good to invest in Phoenix. I'm just going to get a turnkey in Phoenix. Which, again, maybe that's going to be okay, but still, that's not really doing much due diligence. It's trusting everybody else's more headlines, clickbait stuff that's out there that may not be, what they're really looking for.
I agree with you. I also think that there's a potential pitfall that I personally have fallen into there. And that's when you're in a market. Like, I was in Columbia, South Carolina before we moved here, and I lived in an old historic neighborhood, and I kept seeing different opportunity pop up. We were buying different houses that some of them had major renovations that need to be done. When you're in it and you see opportunity pop up within your local market, you want to jump on everything. And you can get that shiny penny syndrome of seeing this opportunity and that opportunity. And I've made the mistake of jumping in on properties and deals that I knew were good. And now I've gotten to a point from making those mistakes that a lot of times the first question I ask is this the type of business I want to be in if it's a business opportunity, or is this the type of project that I want to commit time and life energy to? Because what I've learned at this point is there will always be more deals. And I choose deals now based upon what I want my time, location, and financial independence to look like down the road. And I don't want to create a job for myself by putting myself in a situation where a deal is only a great deal if I manage it, or I'm trusting someone else to manage it. And ultimately they may not be able to do that. So it's always in that local market, you're going to find opportunity. And as a younger investor, you should probably take as much of it as you have the time and energy to take on, because those lessons are going to be the same lessons that you use later on in your career. It's just going to be a few more zeros. It's just going to be bigger projects. But the lesson itself is the same. So take it on. But at some point, start asking yourself the question, does this reach that ultimate goal that I've set for myself? How does this help me on the pathway to where I want to be by this age? Because otherwise, as you get good at recognizing opportunity, there's a lot of it.
Yeah. And you also talked about management, and of course you're involved in management. I always remind people that it's okay if you're going to use property management. That's a smart move if you want to trade the time for it, but you still have to manage the manager or you're going to lose eventually. No, I mean, not all property management companies are good. So if you're not managing what the manager's doing, like, that's why it's not passive.
Sure.
You still have to be checking up, or you're going to have double billing and skimming and, bad tenants just taking the first tenant. And if you're not helping vet the tenants, those are your tenants. I feel very uncomfortable having someone ever choose my tenants. I've never in 30 years let someone do it.
I'll take that one step farther. Even though you may have found a great property manager, what I have found from hiring and firing multiple and from owning a property management company is that whatever state you find them in, they very rarely stay that way for more than 2 to 3 years. I started out making the mistake of being quick to hire and very slow to fire, and I had to learn how to become slow to hire and quick to fire. And what I've found with property management companies is several things. If they're doing a really, really good job, they are probably at the peak performance in terms of the amount of staff that they have and the amount of properties that they have. But if they're really good, it typically means they're ambitious and they're trying to scale. They're typically going to continue to get bigger, or as they have success, they're going to make money and they're going to start buying properties themselves, because people in their portfolio will want to sell properties and they can pick them up on the cheap and manage them at cost. I have a property management company. That's why. So I can drop my Airbnbs in there and they just get handled. But as that person scales, they either add on more properties or they start bringing on their own. Their own properties typically take precedent, or they scale to the point where the quality goes down, or you have property managers who are not very good and your property is going to run into the dirt, or there's a partnership split or something like that. Whatever state you find a property management company in, almost exclusively across the board from what I've seen, they are either getting better or getting worse. And usually when they're getting better, it's because they've scaled too big and they are paring it back down and they've found the sweet spot where they want to live. And a lot of times that's property managers that are farther along in their career and they kind of want to sit and be stable. But if you find a great property manager, don't expect it to be the same situation 2 to 3 years later. And just what you said is the truth. You still have to manage the manager, and the quality of service that you're getting is either going up or going down. It's your job to recognize which direction.
Yeah, I feel the exact same about contractors. I feel like that's the exact same thing. They're really good. You're like, oh, I got 2 projects. And then all of a sudden they start charging you more. And you're like, wait, I thought I'm giving you more jobs. We're supposed to be going down, and your work is getting worse because now you're taking the profits that you made on mine, trying to do an extra flip, but now you're not showing up at my job. It's the same thing. You get good at something, you get too big, you try to go too big, and then every job sucks. I mean, it happens in every industry, but I think in real estate, you can see it a lot. It happens with wholesalers. They get good at marketing. They get all of these leads. They buy one. They can't buy enough. They don't have a buyer's list. Now there's nobody to convert the properties. And they have good properties with good leads that they're wasting, going into the dirt, or they're trying to get too high spreads to get too much money too quickly.
Yep. There's always it's a situation where a lot of times, as long as everybody wants the same thing, everything looks good. Once people start wanting different things, it can get pulled in different directions. That's one of the reasons I like syndication, is that you're in the same boat rowing in the same direction. But otherwise, just be aware that everybody's journey is going to change and people's direction is going to change, and you still have to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening.
Yeah. Hey, it's Jonathan. On this brief interlude, I wanted to let you know that my team is expanding. So Streamline Properties has now expanded from New Jersey, New York, and Nevada to the state of Florida. And because of that, our Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing meetups are also expanding. So right now we do real estate investor meetups in the state of New Jersey once a month on the first Wednesday of every month. You can find more info about those on our website at streamlinedwithad.properties. But those meetups are now opening in the Lakeland area of Florida starting in May 2024. So be on the lookout for that. We're going to be doing once a month meetups in the state of Florida, and we're not done, as we expect to be opening in California and Utah very, very shortly. Let's get back to the show. Well, let's pivot to this reconversion, because I think it's really interesting. You started with a Kmart that you reconverted into self-storage, and then you guys kept going in that direction. So tell us, one, how did you find that, and how did you know it was going to be a good conversion, to storage?
So my partners had started looking around. They had done storage in the past and then gotten into hotels, and they struggled with some hotels. I helped them because we owned a property management company. And because of that, we connected, and I knew that they were going to get back into storage in a big way. I was working in cardiology, surrounded by a bunch of physicians. And I said, look, I know you guys are going to go back into storage. When it happens, I want you to let me know. I want to partner with you, and I also want to bring capital. They said, okay, they would. And they kept their word. And a year later, they called me and they said, hey, we found a Kmart. They specifically had been looking at Kmarts and big box retail buildings across the Southeast. So they came to me. They already had the deal located. It was in Reidsville, North Carolina. It's an 87,000 square foot Kmart. We bought it for $1.5 million. The replacement cost just on the brick and mortar structure was $6.5 million. So just like you flip a house, you don't make your money when you sell it. You don't make your money when you renovated it. You made your money when it smelled like dogs and cats and you bought it for dirt cheap.
Yeah.
So we bought that building for 1.5. We put a little under 2.5 into it. So we're all in, I think, 3.8 million, and stabilized value is 9.1. So it's like, oh, okay. It's real.
Yeah, that's it though. That's why reconversion was so interesting to you. How many storage units are in that, in 87,000 square feet?
That one, I think, is just under 500, I believe. And so a lot of it depends on the feasibility study and the unit density. Obviously, the smaller units, like a 5x5, you get more per square foot than you do like a 10x30. But it's based upon the residential density in a 1, 3, 5, 7 mile radius, how much storage is in the market, the price, all the things, right? That determines what the square footage is. Like, and the number of units. The facility that we bought after that was a 97,000 square foot Kmart in Danville, Virginia. So it's only 10,000 square feet larger, but that one is almost 750 units. A lot of smaller units in there. So so that's a much more profitable. On that project, we bought it for like $2 million. We put $2 million into it. Stabilized value is 13.8.
Yeah. I mean, the returns are amazing, but it does take a chunk to get in on these, especially for reconversion, because reconversion costs a lot. Because like, say you can string together the money to get the property, great. But I think a lot of people wouldn't realize like what the undertaking is to turn that whole thing from a department store into storage.
It's huge. In fact, the juice is typically not worth the squeeze. Like if most people went out there and you tried to buy big box retail, you're going to pay retail costs for the building. You got to raise private or hard money, and then you're paying retail costs for the construction and the management. It doesn't make it worth it. The reason it works for us is we're vertically integrated, meaning we have an acquisitions team that's constantly looking at on and off market deals. We buy buildings for pennies from below the replacement cost because nobody wants an 80 or 90,000 square foot big box retail building.
Right.
Amazon has destroyed big box retail, but they're still usually in a great visible location with good traffic count and residential density.
Yeah.
So I raise the capital from our private group of investors. We have about 100 investors that invest with us. And then my partners, father and son team of Eric and Levi Hemingway that founded Nomad Capital, they are the GCs. They got 30 years of commercial construction experience. So we build at cost plus 12%.
Right.
And then we have in-house property management at 5%. So we don't pay retail costs for the building, the capital, the construction, or the management. If you did pay retail costs for all of those, it honestly really doesn't make it worth it. You have to have that vertical integration top to bottom. But if you have that, like, let's say you and I wanted to go build a self-storage facility right now. It's going to cost us about $110 to $120 a square foot for the construction, plus the cost of the land. Across our last conversions, by the time we buy the building, that's the building, the parking lot, we do the conversion and everything. When we're standing there and cutting the yellow ribbon with the Chamber of Commerce, we're average $65 a square foot.
Wow.
So because of that, once we hit stabilization, we're usually sitting around 30 to 35% LTV, which means we don't have to sell the asset for everybody to get a payday. We can refinance to 55 or 60% LTV. We don't want to stress the asset, but we can refinance. We can pay out all of our investors, pull out a few million for Nomad as well. And when you pull the money out by way of cash out refinance, there's no sale, there's no capital gains. So it's a tax-free event. Then we keep the assets and allow them to continue cash flow moving forward. It's a BRRRR, right? It's a BRRRR on a commercial scale.
And the LPs in there, they got paid out. They're good. They knew that a lot of them are looking for that 2-year turn or 3-year turn, whatever it is, to just get out and put it into something else or put it into the next one that you're going to do, which is usually what works for syndicators. Yeah,
it usually it's a little bit longer just because the buildings are so big. It's going to take us about a year to build it out. So obviously there's no cash flow in year one.
Yeah.
Then it's going to take us about at least a year to fill it up. The good news there is that we still offer preferred return to our investors. And most self-storage is typically cash flow positive between 60 and 65% occupancy. Ours is cash flow positive at about 40% because of the low initial basis. but we're going to fill it up. And then we offer preferred return and then cash flow. And then usually at or before year 5, year 4, year 5, we'll do the refinance where everybody gets a return of capital plus another chunk on top. And the good news is from then on, we keep our investors in the deal. So our investors stay in, continue to cash flow. But exactly your point is correct. Like then they can take their capital. They can go buy a Porsche or do whatever you want. Obviously, we want them to reinvest with us if possible. So that's the idea, is where we are building a tribe of investors that have a long-term vision in place, continue to invest with us. We've been doing it since 2021. We just hit $150 million in assets under management. And then we got a 5-year goal of $500 million and a 10-year goal of $1 billion, which sounds like a lot. But when you're adding big chunks of value very quickly like that, it starts to add up. I would say this. The funny thing is everything we're doing, they're the same lessons from when I was doing single family homes. And they're the same lessons from when I was buying small multifamily properties and converting them to Airbnb. It's a bigger scale. There's a few more zeros. You have a lot more responsibility because like I'll be pretty cavalier with my money. Once you're using somebody else's money, you better get it right. And you better understand that that's a store of their life energy and take good care of it. But the reality is there's really nothing inherently different than the lessons that I learned and my partners learned on their projects earlier on in their career. So anybody listening right now, like the lessons they're learning now, it's the same lessons that they're going to be using 5, 10, 12 years from now doing a 120 unit multifamily apartment complex.
Yeah, I think the vertical integration is really important because especially with acquisitions, you then are in the spot where you don't need any property. So you always have leverage over. The more distress, the better for you because you can do the full reconstruction, where if you're against people with a little less experience or a little less capital, they're like really, really going through the numbers. They're also a little bit desperate. They feel like they have to get self-storage. It's their new asset. But you can just say, well, no, thanks. I mean, and I've always said, like, I was an attorney, but I'm a good negotiator because I will walk away at any time. I just don't care. And no, the other side never likes when you walk away. They can pretend all they want, but when you take that big pile of money that you're going to give them, $1.5 million for Kmart, and they've had no offers, it's been sitting there for 5 years, and you say, I'm just take this bucket of money and go back, to Wilmington, they're going to want the money because there's nothing else out there.
That's right. There's basically an unlimited supply of people looking to buy stabilized self-storage facilities, and there is virtually zero demand for big box retail buildings like Kmart's, grocery stores, warehouses, and things like that. There's so much risk involved and skill involved, which luckily my partners, let's be honest, I don't really have much going for me besides the fact that I talk too much and I like to network with investors and I recognize value, right? And frankly, there's nothing that sexy about self-storage. Like we're renting someone a box of air. Yeah. What is unique is the way that we do it. My partners are buying big box retail buildings. They're doing the heavy lifting. They're doing the construction and converting it. My job is just to get the message out there and educate. And I don't sell what we do to anybody. I want to educate on what our strategy is and what syndication as a whole is, because I don't care if it's with me or syndication or multifamily or RV parks or ATMs or vineyards. There's a million different investments you can have in syndication. What I do care about is that all real estate investors, specifically younger investors, know about this as a strategy, because I think it should be a tool in your tool belt. And maybe the time is not now. Maybe it's later on when your time becomes worth more to you. But this should be part of your strategy as to how you can get up. Your capital should be getting up and going to work even when you don't want to. And the way I think about it is anytime you invest in a passive investment strategy or as close to passive as you can get, you're essentially buying days off. And the idea is that if you buy enough of them, eventually you don't have to go back to work.
Yeah. And one thing I think you were talking about the reconversion and how you guys can do all the GC work, which is huge. But I think a lot of people don't realize that reconversion to self-storage is not easy, but much easier than to residential. Because people say, oh, there are all these buildings. Why don't we just turn them into residential? Well, it's because they don't have bathrooms anywhere. And for residential, you need 1 million more bathrooms, and you can't run plumbing through cement floors. And there's all these issues. But self-storage doesn't need bathrooms. It needs, the existing department store bathrooms. You probably don't even need all of those.
That's right. You nailed it. I mean, if you're going to take an old mill and convert it to multifamily, well, that's 100 units, that's 100 kitchens, and that's probably 200 bathrooms, right? So that's
That's
60
a lot
to
of
80,
water, though.
Yeah.
That's just like a lot of water that can go wrong.
Yeah, $60 to $80 million conversion project. Whereas if you're converting it to storage, it's probably a couple million. Like we still have limitations we still have to have floors that are rated for the same certificate of occupancy that you get for residential.
Yeah.
But you nailed it in terms of I'm not putting in a backsplash or a tub or a shower. We're putting in metal boxes with a grate over the top. Now we're making it class A, like LED lights, motion detected QR screens, touchscreen kiosks.
You don't need an interior designer. It's industrial design, which does look cool. Like if you like industrial design, self-storage can really look cool, but you're not trying to furnish an Airbnb. It's just a whole different beast.
Yeah, you get it running efficiently, and then we typically have someone on site until we hit about 60% occupancy, and then we can pull that manager off and put them at another facility, and we manage with a hub and spoke model.
Yeah,
and from there on, it continues to run itself, and you basically turn a Kmart building into a giant ATM.
Yeah. So when you're buying the big box ones that have already failed, are you looking for ones that are just have their own location and parking, or are you buying in mini malls? Because I do see a lot that are in mini malls, but that's not always the best. There's more traffic, but for self-storage, I don't know what you guys are looking for, if it's better to just have its kind of own separate entity.
Yeah, both. We buy standalone buildings. We also buy some in strip malls. The biggest thing, if it's in a strip mall or a mini mall, is that a lot of times the HOA will determine the CAMs, right. the HOA for the commercial property will determine what you can and can't do there. And a lot of them have moratoriums against storage because they don't look at storage as a traffic driver.
It's not retail,
area. Yeah. Right. But there are things you can do there. A lot of that can be mitigated, or sometimes usually the larger anchor store, like if it was a Kmart or a grocery store or whatever, at one point was the anchor store, and they usually have the ability to change the HOA. So you can go in and you can buy the whole strip mall, and then change the HOA and put storage in, and then sell or out parcel the rest, or keep it, or whatever you want to do. But so it doesn't really matter. The biggest thing that we care about is traffic count, visibility, residential density in a 1, 3, 5, 7 mile radius. The average storage in the market, make sure it's currently underserved based upon the demand, et cetera, and all the feasibility study.
Yeah, I mean, more mom and pops in the area for storage, the better for modified good storage, because they're just have no services at all. I also thought if you're doing that reconversion and they have some type of retail rules, a lot of self-storage still have a storefront up front where, boxes, locks, stuff where you just have the one person maybe in and out on hours. That could solve some of the problems. But that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny, though, because they say, well, it's not good traffic, for the retail, but it would actually get a lot of traffic. They're not thinking the right way.
It actually gets more traffic now than it used to, because the previous generation, if you think about storage, you think baby boomers and you think people in and out maybe once or twice a year. The millennial generation, which now makes up 34% of the population, uses 38% of storage.
Yeah.
And the way that they're using it is very different, because they are not buying houses that have attics and basements and garages. They're renting. And so they would rather rent a smaller space and then get a storage unit as an extension of the closet or garage. So they'll be in a property once or twice a week, at least 2 to 3 times a month.
Yeah.
It means that it has to be safe, secure, well lit, have easy access, in and out, QR codes, touchscreen kiosks, so they can get in at any point in time. But they use it as an extension of the closet or garage. So they've got winter clothes and kayaks and mountain bikes and all the things in there. So it is a lot more traffic than it used to be. That's for sure. And that only seems like it's picking up.
Yeah, and I think that trend will continue as we look at micro housing, tiny houses, and all of these kind of smaller versions of what can. Of course, you're going to need storage, but then it's a great spend. I mean, you can build a tiny house if you buy a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. You build a tiny house for 50, 60,000, and there. Okay, so you're getting upsold for storage every couple months. Great. That's where you keep your nice bikes, and they're safe, and they're not on the side of your mini house.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll always be cheaper than paying for that amount of space at your house and where you're living.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, going back to your whole journey, I wonder if you could have one piece of advice for new investors who are getting into it but have no idea what they want to do. What would be the first thing that you would tell them to do?
Number one, I think you are who you're going to be 10 or 20 years from now, with the exception of the places you go, the people you meet, the content you consume, and the books you read. So number one is networking and being willing to put yourself out there on a local level. And I don't think you can understate the value of some of the larger meetups and conferences, understanding that there's a lot of ego involved in some of those. And for a lot of people, it is about the number of doors. And it kind of has to be with syndication because you're building credibility in your track record. Like, so that's important. But at the same time, I would say if you don't know, like if I'm asking you what your goal is for your future and you want, and the answer could be this, could be that. A lot of times the answer is, I don't know. And that's okay because I don't know is still an answer. It just implies ambiguity. And ambiguity is just either lack of education or lack of vision. And if you don't have that for yourself, number one, consume as much content as you can to try to get clarity on that from other people and network, right? Because those are the things that are going to turn you into the future version of you that's going to give you a vision as to what that goal is for yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think like at the very, very beginning for anyone, if you just got out of the house and went to a meetup once a month for 6 months, you'll immediately be ready and be more confident than if you're just sitting at home looking at properties, on your computer all the time and maybe going in a forum here and there. That's not going to get you anywhere. You need the people who seem just like you, who already did it ahead of you. Like, that's what's cool. I've always found that, I know you know this from your meetups and stuff. When you go there, it's like the millionaire next door philosophy is so real that nobody understands it. You're like, there's just some random guy standing in the corner and they're like, oh, is that guy going to get our drinks? And you're like, he has 37 multifamilies. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he just doesn't give a crap what he's wearing. Yeah. That's true. I mean, it's like the prophecy, like they watch too much social media and think everyone's pulling up in a Lamborghini. It just does not work like that.
Yeah. And on top of that, like if you're listening to this podcast for sure, or if you're thinking about going to a meetup, you already have something in common with everyone there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Great
real estate. And we all love to talk about real estate. I especially talk about it too much, but you have common ground. And that's why you should never have fear of picking up the phone and cold calling on an investment property, because you already have something in common with the person that owns that and bought it at one point in time, right? There's continuity there. So put yourself out there because you already have common ground to build off of. And a lot of times it's going to be, you don't have to know everybody in your market, but typically there's going to be a couple super connectors. If you know 2 or 3 people, they typically know everybody else that you need to. And that trust transfers when it comes to help in your local market. Yeah.
Awesome. Clint, is the best place for people to get in touch with you guys about joining those syndications or learning more, nomadcapital.us?
Yep, that's right. Nomadcapital.us is our website. So Nomad Capital is obviously the idea of a nomad is somebody that goes where they want, when they want, and does what they want. So you can catch us, go to nomadcapital.us. You can schedule a call with me, or if anybody wants to email me directly, I'm happy to chat. It's Clint, C-L-I-N-T, at nomadcapital.us.
Awesome. That was a great episode. A little more self-storage. And it's so cool because we've had a fair amount of self-storage, but everyone's different. The vision of storage is really the same, but how everyone approaches it and what their background is really changes how you get there and what you want to do with it. I love the name too, because it does take that time freedom part with it. That is the nomad. It's like, the vagabonding style is like, just get out there, park your stuff. Seems great. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. Pleasure to chat.
All right. That was Clint Harris. I'm Jonathan Green. We'll see you next episode. Wait, you have reached the end of the show. This is the part where you're going to get ready to check out, but I've actually changed this part. For over 120 episodes, you heard the same thing. Well, now I've changed it. I've thought about doing intros to the next episode, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. These are my pitches at the end. I've got nothing to sell you at all, but I do want to remind you that it really would help us if you support the podcast in the right way. All that means is subscribing to the podcast so you get it on Monday and Thursday, writing us a 5-star review if you believe that we deserve a 5-star review, sharing it with your friends, and being a participant in the Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing community. Soon there's going to be a new website launched. Maybe when you're listening to this, it's already going to be out there. That's where we're going to have collaboration. You're going to be able to see a lot from the guest. It is coming soon. And I just want to tell you, from me to you, I don't know how I got here, over 100 episodes. I'm so appreciative. of you listening to the podcast and especially sticking around to hear this part. We'll see you next episode.